Goedemiddag voor de verandering en welkom bij Erkenbrand Klassiek. Today we decided to do things a little differently and we are recording in situ at the Vienna Opera House, where I understand Mr. H tricked Mr. Yorkshire into going to Catholic Mass.
Yes, he duped me. He said it was going to be a boys' choir.
Well, it wasn't the boys' choir, but it was mixed in with a Catholic Mass, so I think Yorkshire is now mesmerized by the ceremony and the pomp and circumstance, and I think he should be converting soon.
Yes, as he should.
No, I don't think I will. In fact, when the guy came out for the collection, he kind of looked at me and I looked at him, and we both knew that it was never going to.
Maybe you look Scottish to him.
Penny pincher.
Well, you know, you can't serve God and Mammon both.
Very
well. We can try. Man can try.
So so I was trying to save his soul.
Right.
But we did get to hear some Gregorian music. I believe that the first part was definitely Gregorian. So, like the first episode that we had, we heard. I believe we still have the form from. For the listeners, if you hear background noises, we are on location at the Opera House Cafe.
Yeah, in Vienna.
Vienna, no less.
Yes.
Yes, we're at the Vienna Opera House, where Mr. H is here, and another Mr. H in the past once painted this opera house.
Did he?
Yes, but if you want to see his finest work, I recommend the railings next to the river.
Okay.
Yeah, the stuff that we heard earlier on at the Mass was by Hans Leo Hassner, who transcended the Renaissance and Baroque. He sort of straddled those two eras. So,
okay.
1564 to 1612 he lived.
Yes, and speaking about Baroque, I believe that we are doing, of course, Mr. H's picks today. Let me just get that out of the way. And Mr. H has already declared in the past that he is quite a fan of Baroque.
Absolutely.
So, I guess we'll just give the floor to Mr. H to tell us about his picks a bit.
Well, for the first pick, what's nice is that Yorkshire and I were conversing before, and he was able to find a few books on my choices of composers, and you have also Debussy in French, but I'll just give a little bit of background information. My first piece that I chose is Claude Debussy, Arabesque. Claude. My French is lacking. He was born in August 22nd, 1862, and he was seen as the founder of musical impressionism. He didn't really choose that term himself and didn't really like it as much. Musical impressionism is meant to convey a mood or to give an impression. And it was inspired by a painting by Monet. And in the show notes, of course, the listeners can't see it, I left a picture of the painting that is Impressionism. Apparently, he was also, as with most of the composers that we saw, a child prodigy. And at age 10, he was already composing music. And yeah, as a prodigal child in 1884, he entered his cantata into the Prix de Rome. And he took home the top prize. And his prize, He was at the Conservatoire of Paris at the age of 10, but in 1884 was when he did the piece, the different piece that I'm talking about. He was in Rome, and he studied the music of Richard Wagner and was very influenced by Wagner as well. And oh yeah, I see here that you have a piece about Wagner. So Yorkshire just happens to be reading a piece I can see on his book. And where did you find these wonderful books? Because he has a book on Purcell here. What was the name of the library?
Oh, it was the local university library.
Okay. The local university library has even books on Graupner, which I was unable to find quite a lot of information on Graupner.
Well, I tell you what, when I first searched Graupner to record the pieces for the show, I couldn't find much of anything. It took me a little bit to find much of his stuff.
The one I couldn't find anything on was Murray, which he's chosen. In fact, you know, I called a friend of mine in France, you know, who's very cultured, and he'd never heard of Murray either.
Oh wow!
My,
very
an
obscure-
American who knows about the European culture better than us.
About
Be ashamed.
pure Baroque composers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a reason for this, and I'll explain that later when we get to Graupner. But for this piece, I think what I would like to do is play the piece that I originally heard. The story of the reason why I like this piece comes from my childhood. Late at night after Doctor Who, they would an astronomer would come on television, and he played this theme music every time before he would tell about the stargazing, what you could see in the sky. And the music was actually, and I didn't know until later, until I heard the classical version, was an electronic version of this piece, Arabesque.
Okay.
And we can play a bit of the sample, and it is from, I believe I sent you the sample.
Yeah, but I already cleared it, so I have to look it up. So if you could send it to me again, that'd be quicker.
Yeah, so this piece is basically just, it's from my childhood, and it's something that until later on I didn't actually realize it was inspired by a classical piece.
Oh wait, is this the Clair de Lune version?
No, it's let's see, I will send it again.
Yes. This is what you get when preparing ahead, you know. You get people like me who clean everything, and then gotta keep things orderly, and then, you know, everything's gone.
But did you find any information about our composer?
Debussy.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, his other great, because he was a modernist, of course, being influenced by Impressionism, but also by symbolism. He was a friend of Stéphane Mallarmé, the poet, and Wagner, of course, is the great symbolist. You know, the symbol that he uses of the spear, for example, in Parsifal, where the spear represents something greater than what it is, and so he was very much influenced by that. And as I say, you know, we've got the transition towards modernism. Stéphane Mallarmé is very interesting as well because he influenced James Joyce, and I often conjecture that is the reason why Stefan Daedalus is called Stephen Daedalus is called Stephen, as a kind of nod towards one of his great influences, Stéphane Mallarmé. His other, of course, was the other Frenchman, Dujardin.
Wagner, do you have anything to add on Debussy?
Well, one thing is maybe interesting for our listeners, which is you have this movement called Impressionism, and you've got this movement called Expressionism. Impressionism has more to do with a rendering an impression of more or less objective reality. It's colored by emotions a little bit, but they use new techniques in those days, but they still try to, give a rendering of reality. Whereas Expressionism is really concerned with the emotional inner life, you might say. So if you look at Expressionist paintings, for example, then you see a lot of distortion, a lot of emphasis on certain details, And so the aim of both movements is actually quite different. So if we are listening to Debussy, we get an impression of the things he tries to paint in his notes, you might say, colored with emotion, but not the fiery expression, you might say, of expressionism. So I just wanted to put those terms over there so that people have a little bit of an idea what we're talking about.
Right. It actually reminds me a little bit of the left-right divide of, you know, expressing emotion versus expressing reality. So I guess we're the impressionists and the left are the expressionists.
Maybe. Well, there's one argument I could think of that supports that, which is that in music, what is normally called expressionism is the people around Arnold Schoenberg and the whole lot, you might say. And I hate Arnold Schoenberg, so maybe that's an argument.
Okay. I have the electronic version of the piece that Mr. H wanted to play. So I'll play about a minute of it. So I guess put on a stopwatch or wait for me to talk again. So here we go. Esauto Mito Arabesque number 1. Well, I understand that nobody else would listen to it, but it's a quite interesting mix of classical and electronic music, so I guess the listeners will enjoy.
Yeah, it had a science fiction feel to it, and as I said, when I was a child, after watching Doctor Who, it was late at night, and then this show would come on, and he was a stargazer, and he would just teach people about astronomy and to look up at the skies and explain the constellations and such. And so when I heard the real version, the original version, it was already something that I knew out of my head, all the notes and everything.
Do you also want to play the original version then, to compare?
Absolutely, because as you know, the original version is more beautiful than this electronic version. So absolutely.
All right, so let's. To contrast,
Yes,
let's play.
We've had the degenerate version. We'll have the proper version now.
So we'll play. I'll play about a minute of this as well, and then we'll comment on it. So here we have the original Arabesque by Debussy. Right, that was about a minute of Debussy.
Really beautiful piece. I think of course, only a Steinway grand piano can do justice to it. So if you have some grandma pounding away on a upright that hasn't been tuned, it really it isn't doing it the piece justice.
Yeah. I think honestly it is indeed better than the electronic piece. But well, that's
Yeah.
not surprising, is it?
Well, no, because if you are a really great composer, then you know what kind of instruments you are writing your music for. So if you really understand what a piano can do, if you really understand the sound possibilities, then of course, if you try some other instrument, it doesn't work. In opera, for example, you see exactly the same thing. For example, Verdi is really maybe the greatest writer for voice ever. That's also because he knows exactly what the possibilities are. And so if you transpose an opera aria, for example, to be sung by another type of voice, it really doesn't sound that great. It's very specific. So of course it's nice to have some electronic version to make it to reach a more to popular audience maybe. But the thing is that it's really thought out for special music instrument, sometimes even for special piano, one that was constructed then and then by this and this builder. So I can appreciate the fact that it becomes more popular if you use it with electronic instruments, but the original undoubtedly is much better.
And with the electronics version, I was surprised to find out that, and I have to check my sources again, that this piece was made in the 70s, so electronic music was not easy to put together in those times. It was quite a task to blend the sounds together and everything. So it actually was labor intensive to make electronic music in those days.
Especially because we didn't have any digital techniques at that time. So if you listen to Tangerine Dream, for example, which is one of my favorites, they all used electronic music, but it was all done by analog instruments. Korg is the great name, for example, of one of the builders of wonderful instruments that can have all kinds of interesting effects that, well, you simply have to have that instrument for it. You cannot produce it by a digital sample or something.
And that's why if you listen to the electronics version of this piece on a headset, you can hear the different layers and how complex it was. It wasn't just a simple man on a computer laptop mixing something together. It was actually some thought put into it. I'm not defending.
Yes, I was a little bit dismissive of it, but there was behind this composition. That's true. Yes.
Mr. H, do you want to carry on explaining Arabesque? Because I see that you wrote some stuff detailing it.
Well, one thing that I wanted to speak about just briefly was the name of the piece, Arabesque. For my research, Arabesque was just inspired by a dance fashion, and in the show notes I put a ballet dancer doing the arabesque. It's a certain ballet stance. So if someone looks up the meaning of the piece, you could see the background behind it.
Yes.
Yes, so there are ballet movements that have standard names so that everybody knows exactly what they are talking about. It's and arabesque is one of the well, how do you say? One of the great standard movements in ballet. Yes.
One of my favorite books by Edgar Allan Poe is about arabesque, but he means it in the Orientalist art sense.
Oh, Edgar Allan Poe, an American. I thought we had no culture.
I'm sure he plagiarized everything.
Yeah.
Well, Poe was one of the first symbolists, of course.
Yeah, and I think him and Lovecraft are sort of in a tradition of literature all of their own.
Not really. I mean, they're part of very much the Anglo macabre tradition.
I suppose so.
and both. What's interesting about Poe and Lovecraft is that they're both complete Anglophiles. Poe was actually educated in England, and so they constitute part of that tradition that comprises. Lovecraft, for example, was influenced very much by Arthur Machen, the Welsh writer of short stories, and you have people like M.R. James in that tradition, although he's more towards the Poe kind of writing rather than the Lovecraft.
I suppose Mary Shelley and some works by Byron also fit into that tradition. Stoker.
Stoker certainly, Shelley less so, because it's more. It's not really out and out supernatural like the likes of Poe and Lovecraft and M.R. James. Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, who is another one, the Irishman.
Well, Frankenstein, it's sort of on the verge, isn't it? I mean, there's a science to it, but it's of course
exactly it's science rather than superstition.
Yeah.
And that's the big difference.
I think also one of the more bigger differences is that there is the Frankenstein monster realizes his own humanity by the end of it, and he's sort of like an edgy Nietzschean Übermensch for most of the book, where he dictates his own morality. He's actually called Adam. A lot of people don't know that the Frankenstein monster isn't just a monster. He's actually a Promethean depiction of humanity and morality. But there we go.
No, he's not called Adam. He says in the novel, "I ought to be thy Adam."
Oh, right.
So Adam is, of course, the new creation by God. Then.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. It's very much. It's the idea of replacing God with science.
Yes, or man playing God himself.
Yeah, Frankenstein is a very, very interesting work, and it's really a shame that it's been, made into some sort of caricature by Hollywood. But
Yeah.
what are you gonna do?
Yes, it seems that the novel itself, I should also read it, is quite deep. It's not at all just a superficial horror story.
No. Like I said, it really is about what is man and what is morality, and like David says, it's also about new creation of mankind. But we're getting off track, I suppose.
Well,
Yes, I just wanted to add.
just to sort of finish off on that, a lot of these horror stories, are far deeper. This is why they've entered the literary canon, because of their depth. So Bram Stoker's Dracula is interested in the tension between modernity and medievalism, as is Lovecraft, for example, although Lovecraft goes back even further to sort of
Lovecraft is also very existential.
prehistoric and Egyptian ideas.
Yeah, but he's also very concerned about the existential meaning of man and the pointlessness of life. And he's a very depressing character, that too.
That's right. Yeah, he did have a very depressing outlook on life, that is true, as many conservatives do have.
So, yeah.
Which is why I'm a traditionalist and not a conservative.
Good for you.
Right.
But could I add a little bit about the arabesque?
Sure.
Because, of course, the arabesque is a position in ballet where the dancer is standing on one foot, or really on one toe, actually, on the big toe. So it's an extremely advanced position. You can't do this at home, I would say. But arabesque is also used in another way, which is it reminds people of Arabian Nights and things like that. It's a rather florid musical piece that plays with the structures. It goes through the structures, and this is also the thing that makes it comparable to the painting, because if you look at Impressionist paintings, the structures are there, but they are fluid, you might say. The lines are not drawn with a pencil. It's more an impression indeed. So that's the way the music resembles the painting, or the other way around.
Right, so I think we should carry on to your next piece, Mr. H.
Yes, as you know, and we spoke about, definitely Baroque man,
Yes.
and Jean-Joseph Moret is one of the lesser known composers. In fact, I think everyone here has had a hard time finding
Yeah.
information about him.
Never even heard of him. It's interesting.
Now, the reason that I like this piece is because I like fanfare music, and fanfare music was usually a entrance music for royalty, and that's of course why I chose Purcell. A Purcell piece during the first podcast was because it was a royal piece, and I really like the opulence of the Baroque pieces like this, and that's why I like Jean-Joseph Moret. The fanfare piece here is it gives the feeling of royalty, of when the royalty had better times, I should say.
Yeah. He's a contemporary of Purcell, isn't he?
Yeah, actually. Yep.
I'm sure Mr. Yorkshire will have something to add on the better times of the monarchy.
Not in that period, no.
Oh, all right. When was this written, Mr. H?
This was definitely in the 1700s.
Okay.
But
Early 1700s.
Yeah, I suppose that was kind of the height of the enlightened despotism, so I guess that would be your favorite period of monarchy, wouldn't it?
yeah.
Yes, what about Frederick the Great, for example?
Mr. Yorkshire?
Hello?
Well, if we're talking about fanfares, mostly fanfares happened in great antiquity as well. It was usually trumpets, or it was an entrance for royalty. So of course it had to have a certain character about it, that royalty was entering the room, and that someone grand was about to be in your presence.
Yeah. So this is a remnant of pagan times, is it?
Actually, yes. In looking at the literature, they're talking about ancient French hunting music, where trumpets or horns were blown to signify the beginning of a hunt.
But not the hunt for the king, I assume.
No.
Shall we listen to the piece? I'm quite
Yes, I
interested.
think we should. So this piece is quite short. It's about 1.5 minutes, so just play it in its entirety.
Excellent.
So here we have Moret's Fanfare. Okay, so either I have heard this piece before, or all the horn fanfares sound very, very similar?
It's probably a combination of both because I do believe that this Baroque style, especially the entrance of royalty, they all have a feeling of a national anthem. So I think probably some characteristics or perhaps a certain note combination could be in common with the national anthem of a country. I have no doubt of that.
Yes, may I add a little bit? The thing is, when you were talking about Baroque, I was thinking about Handel, for example. But this is earlier, isn't it? This is more the time of the Louis XIV, the Sun King in France. So it's yes. So that really has a different character than Handel, for example. It reminds me very much of Lully, for example, the great French court composer. So if I hear this music, I'm not thinking about great English monarchy, but of King Louis XIV of France and Versailles and all the great buildings he created.
We can't. I'm sure we'll have Mr. Yorkshire on our next for this one, but I don't think you can call the British monarchy great at any point. I mean, the enlightened despotism of actual strong central monarchies is a very French and Prussian thing. Maybe the Habsburgs too, but the British crown has always had a strong streak of democracy in it, from the Magna Carta onward, of course, but before then also in the sense of the shires and the sheriffs, and there was a lot of democratic sort of institutions.
That's true. Yes, the French state was very much centralized, and it killed off all the smaller regional cultures. At least it tried to. For example, in Brittany. So I don't know what you call great. I mean, the French monarchy was actually detrimental to local culture. And maybe the English monarchy was less so. I don't know.
Well, the problem with the English monarchy from 1066 onwards was that it wasn't ours.
Mm-hmm.
We were literally part of another empire from then on. So it had no organic relationship to the people themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's what really the major problem with the monarchy has been. For all that time, and why I think that we gravitated more towards democratic systems because of the lack of organic relationship between aristocracy and
no, I don't believe that at all. I think there's a certain rebelliousness and independence in the Nordic Germanic character that makes it so that we always are more inclined toward democracy. I mean, after all, Iceland was a republic for about 50 years between 960 and 1010.
It wasn't a republic to what people think of it as.
No,
republic.
That's true. But
basically, it was Mighty's ride. Whoever had the most numbers to support him in the Althing,
yes,
won.
Yes, well, it's like I said, it's not the democracy.
More anarchy than republic, I would say.
No, there were institutions and there were rules and law, but that's what I'm trying to say is that throughout Germanic and Nordic cultures, there's always been this idea of strong independence, and having some absolutist king telling you what to do is just not done. You just cut off his head.
No, there has always been a certain deference to someone greater than yourself. You have to always have that. Mm-hmm. There were kings in Scandinavia, so that's not.
No, but those were those kings also. Those were not absolutist kings.
Harold Bluetooth, for example, was a very rude king, as was Harold Harfagri.
Yes, but
there's a difference. There's a difference between centralization and having a great leader who commands respect, but doesn't force you to give up all your local ideas and cultures and privileges.
Hardrada did not dismiss the thing, and he still had a lot of authority in the Jarls. He still relied on the Fjord. I mean, there were still all the institutions of which allowed lesser people to have some say in the government were
At
still
least
there.
something, yes. But Mr. Yorkshire,
But sorry,
the stewards were not foreign, were they?
Scots.
they were Scottish, so they were foreign to the English.
Mm.
In fact, one of the reasons for the gunpowder plot, as organised by the likes of Guy Fawkes and that crew,
Mm-hmm.
that was not only to do with instituting a Catholic king, but also they felt that the Scottish had too much power in Parliament. Guy
Of
Fawkes
course.
was actually Yorkshireman, so you know.
He tried to blow up Parliament. Does that
Yes,
make you?
that's right.
Do you have a kindred spirit with him?
I
then?
do indeed, yes.
Oh my, Mr. Yorkshire is convicted for terrorism.
Yes. But the interesting thing is, of course, that the time of Louis XIV was also the great time of Holland. It was the 17th century. So we have also a rather nice piece in Holland that resembles this piece of Morat, I believe. So if you listen to that piece, you will recognize time and the style of music immediately. So maybe it would be nice to have this small piece also played, a little piece of it.
Yes, I could play it. Do you have a link for me, or should I look it
I
up?
have a link for you. It's called The Young Prince of Friesland,
Is this
And-
about?
and it's still being used by the Dutch government when a minister or something is arriving, comes to get someone from the airport or something, when the Queen is not there.
All right, perfect. So, de jonge prins van Friesland.
Yes. So you see the music is quite similar. A lot of bright trumpets and everything.
I think the
So-
trumpet, the brass, and the moray piece was a lot more prominent than this one. This is a more complete orchestra, I guess, and the moray piece was much more focused on the horn.
There are
That's
a few
true,
more
but that's also because of the orchestra that's playing it. Yes.
There's a Moray version with the organ as well. A German composer did a version with the organ and the trumpet. It was also quite beautiful.
So you see, you can of course play the same piece with different kinds of orchestras. I do understand that, for example, the Jonge Prins van Friesland was played by a more modern orchestra that has a different sound. That's true. Yes.
Might be it, yeah. But do you want to add anything on Moray, Mr. H? Because I think we got a little distracted there with the monarchy bit.
No, I think that we've covered the piece and exactly what the feeling is and the intention is behind it, and the courtly nature of it. And that should bring us to our next composer.
Yes, which is again Purcell.
Well, I'll just kind of make the transition in that when James II was deposed and we had the so-called Glorious Revolution, when we got your chap William of Orange and his Stuart wife, Charles sorry, Louis XIV harbored James II.
Yes, and there still are Jacobins to this day in France, I believe.
Yeah, and of course Henry Purcell was one of the major men of the musical court of James II. So I'll hand you over to Mr. H.
Well, let me just add one thing about the Colors Revolution. I mean, we like to say that William III was a Dutch man put on the English throne, but his mother was of the House of Stuart and his wife was of the House of Stuart. So he is about as Scottish as he was Dutch. It was mostly a Dutch army that put him in place, but it was his family ties, his lineage, that allowed him to be acceptable to the English aristocracy. So.
Yeah, but it's interesting about the House of Stuart. Were they kings or were they stewards?
Good point. Well, okay, we'll hand off to Mr. H. Henry Purcell, tell us more.
Well, he was considered England's greatest Baroque composer, and me loving Baroque style, it's fitting that we play a piece from him. He was dubbed Orpheus Britannicus, and he produced mostly vocal and choral music. He only wrote one opera, and yeah, we'll discuss the significance of his opera because he wrote an opera also inspired by Dido.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll discuss a little bit of the history of Carthage in the next later in the section.
Yes, sure. Do you want to play the piece first? No.
Just a tiny bit more background. It seemed that Purcell was quite. He was, of course, when King James II made a lot of court changes, one of them was to make Purcell the court harpsichordist, and he was in charge of making a lot of the courtly music. And when Queen Mary's pregnancy was announced, he was commissioned to compose an anthem for Psalm 128.
Okay.
And he also composed an ode to Saint Cecilia, and as we know, Cecilia is the patron saint of music.
Yes,
there used to be a society.
Know why?
No.
Do you,
Tell
well, Cecilia she was found and executed by the Romans in a rather interesting way. She was put into a room, and then hot steam was pumped into the room. And during this procedure, the pipes started to make all kinds of whistling noises, a kind of music, you might say. And that's how she became the patron of music.
So she didn't do anything, she was just tortured to death in an amusing way.
In a musical way, I would say. I don't know about amusing.
Well, there used to be a society in England, and it was established in 1683, and it was a celebration of this day, but I don't believe that it's celebrated as much anymore. But there used to be a Saint Cecilia Day, and
many choirs at least over here are also called Cecilia. That's typically a Roman Catholic thing over here.
Mm.
She was, as you said, put to death, but it was for her Christian beliefs.
Of course. But the way she was put to death made a musical impression, you might say.
Yeah, and I suppose the Calvinists here aren't really fond of much of melody.
No, they're not fond of music at all, actually.
They do sing in choirs, but it's very solemn.
Yeah. It's very solemn. It's very slow. It's rather deadening music, I'm afraid.
I tend to actually attend Catholic Mass on Christmases rather than Calvinist ones, despite my dislike of the popery of Catholicism.
You know, we can still have all kinds of means to draw you in, somehow.
Well, being good Catholics that we are, at the Mass today, we had to stand and sit several times. The incense was smelling quite nice, and actually, I really, really enjoy the tradition of the Catholic Church. I think it's beautiful. I think it's something that should be maintained. And you can see that each movement, every part of the procedure was done 1,000 times before, and that the people.
And it's extremely well thought out also. There's a tradition of 2,000 years behind it, don't forget.
Yeah, but I tend to agree with Mr. Yorkshire on that it being far too much a Middle Eastern religion, Catholicism.
Yes, I know. That's about the story. But simply don't listen to the Bible and enjoy the spectacle, I would say.
Right.
Frankly, I'll have to say it bored the arse off me.
You'd rather have been in the woods running around naked doing some mushrooms or what?
Well, that's not a bad idea.
I think that paganism is a bit livelier than Christianity.
Well, I suppose.
But
I mean,
of
no
course,
human sacrifices for one.
Well, that depends on the sort of paganism, of course, as to whether there were human sacrifices or not. Certainly in the Norse tradition, I don't think there ever were.
No, it doesn't really seem to fit with the character. I think that was actually Christian propaganda to slander.
No. I think there were human sacrifices, but well, we can't copy everything as much as we like to do so. But
That's right.
So shall we play the piece by Purcell now that we've completely ripped it out of its context?
yes,
yeah,
please
we'll do that.
Okay, Henry Purcell, sound the trumpet. Again with the damn affectation in the voice. I mean, it reminds me of Harry Potter. Maybe if you make me watch Harry Potter and make me listen to Purcell on a loop, I'll develop Stockholm Syndrome and enjoy it at some point. But God.
Wait a minute. What kind of affectation are you talking about?
In the voice.
Yeah, well, that's a kind of musical style. The thing is, this is actually a kind of absolute music before Richard Wagner ever wrote about it. In this sense, you don't listen to the words that much. You know what's being sung, but that's being repeated 1,000 times. But what's actually being done is that the human voice is used as a kind of instrument. So, well, affectation, I don't think it's the right word for it. It's just using the voice in a certain way, which is completely different from using it in conversation.
Yeah.
Wagner, you're absolutely right about this. In fact, what Purcell was doing here was to incorporate a two-bar modulating ground bass as the singers imitate the sound of trumpets. So the singers were supposed to, as you notice, there's no trumpets in this piece, and it's called Sound the Trumpet. The voices were supposed to be the trumpet.
And
Well,
anyway-
it's all very nice, but I don't like it.
But I can see Fausto's point, and I think that one of the problems is that the musical clique had really become a clique, because it had, like Purcell, he came from a Norman family who'd come over with with William I, and his family had really been in the service of the kings and everything for generations.
Really?
His father had also been in royal service upon the Restoration, and sang at the coronation of Charles II.
Mm-hmm.
So back when we got we got culture back, essentially, and there's so there is a certain kind of cliqueiness in that they'd become increasingly divorced from from real life almost, and that the court became a bubble. But
Sounds like something that's happening today.
yeah, that's
Well,
right.
but with a lossless culture, I must remind you.
Yeah.
But it also, I think, has to do with the fact of having a restoration. Basically, we were reduced to a cultureless, almost Islamic state, for a period of 18 years.
By
During
Cromwell, you mean?
Yes.
You mean by Cromwell?
Yes.
And,
Yes.
when first Oliver Cromwell and then his son Richard Cromwell became Lord Protectors of England, and they instituted Puritanism as the state religion, and almost a sort of a military dictatorship come theocracy.
Well,
Yes.
nothing wrong with a theocracy.
I thought you were going to
Right,
say that.
Yeah, it depends on if it's the right religion. If it's kind of the semi-Islamic barbarism where you strip the churches of all art, then it's not really worth having, is it? Because that's the major part of a religion.
I think the major part of a religion is spirituality and community, but I don't think Puritanism is very good at enforcing community, considering the Salem witch trials and the level of purity testing that goes on inside.
Well, the thing is that Puritanism is very individualistic.
It's
It's all about your own soul and your own feelings of being saved or not. So it's the death for community building, I would say.
The SGP, our Calvinist community, has this problem a bit in the Netherlands as well, where there's a lot of in-family crime and a lot of immoral action, prostitution and so on, which is probably in part because the bar is put so high for you to be a moral person in that community that a lot of people just give up on trying, I think.
Yes, they don't bother anymore.
Yeah, it's too difficult to be a good person according to the standards of your community.
Yes, and also, I mean, whether you are one of the elect does not depend upon your actions. It only depends upon the grace of God. So what can you do?
Well, true.
That's a very pagan idea, actually.
No, not really, do you? I mean, the fact that paganism has, of course, fate, and fate is in your character, fate is in the things that happen to you, but you do have a certain amount of freedom on how you react to that. And if you die bravely on the battlefield, then you will go to Valhalla.
Oh, can't you
So-
you can fight the gods? I mean, it's always pointless. I guess that's the entirety of Greek
You can
mythology.
fight your destiny.
Yeah, I guess that's
in a certain
the overarching story of the entirety of Greek mythology is basically you're fucked, kiddo, and you can't fight fate.
That's not what happens. People do fight fate,
Yeah, but
and
they always lose.
the way they act makes them honorable or dishonorable.
I guess
And
the ultimate.
honor is the thing that is the all important thing.
I suppose so, but I guess the ultimate story that represents most of Greek mythology is the story of Sisyphus. I guess that's basically Greek mythology condensed to one story.
That's not his destiny. He's punished by the gods, but it was not really his destiny. The destiny is something more than the gods. The gods are subservient to destiny, especially in the Norse mythology. The gods can die over there.
Well, yeah, Norse mythology is slightly different, of course, but yeah, I guess we should carry on talking about actually music.
Really?
Yeah, to get back to Henry Purcell and also the restoration. One of the jobs he did was he copied damaged manuscripts that had been neglected during the interregnum. These were manuscripts from Elizabethan and Stuart periods. And of course, Cromwell being a completely cultureless barbarian, allowed all this to lapse. So we've talked about the tension between civilization and barbarity before. Here you had a complete throwback to absolute barbarity when you, but equally. In a very rigid system, which is pretty much mirrors Islamic fundamentalism.
Yes, the destruction of the icons of the statues and everything. But I would like to add something more to the fact that you say, well, it's so effeminate music. The thing is, of course, that life was very tough in those times. People did wear the wigs and things like that, but many of the people who wore them were actually quite fighters and everything. So it's more extreme, you might say. The manliness was more extreme, and the refinement was more extreme, it seems. So it was a more colorful time than today, maybe.
Well, you could duel someone to death over spilled beer, so I suppose there's that.
Yes, and and life was harsh. Don't forget. I mean, they didn't have any of the modern luxuries, and life was short and brutish, I think. So we always must think about that too.
Let's pull Hobbes into this. Yes.
Well, his ideas did come from somewhere.
I suppose so. I'm much more in favor of Hobbes than Rousseau, anyway.
Well, we'll talk about that some other time.
Yes. So, Mr. H, do you have anything you'd like to add to Purcell?
Yeah, for this particular piece, we played "Come Ye Sons of Art," and as you know, that was written in 1694 for the birthday of Queen Mary. So this piece, "Sound the Trumpets," comes from this. And during the first program, the Baroque era, we only played one portion of this. This is part of that composition, "Sound the Trumpets." So this is just part of a longer work that we've already explored before.
Okay,
I'd like to add a bit as well about Purcell, in that he didn't just compose for king and for church, because he composed, for example, for King James's coronation, and played organ during that as well. He composed "My Heart is Inditing of a Good Matter," for example, for the coronation. But he didn't just compose for those. He composed as well for the theatre. And of course, with the restoration of the monarchy, we had the restoration of the theatres, which of course had been dissolved again under Cromwell.
Can't have anything fun with the Puritans, of course.
Nope, no fun at all. Apart
Honestly,
from
I do
apart from
tend to.
burning women.
I do tend to agree with the no fun part.
You agree with it.
Yes.
You don't enjoy fun anyway.
Yeah.
So.
It's a dirty parasite.
Well, so people just having a little bit of fun is being a parasite. I
It's
don't think
disgusting
that's-
wastrels instead of working and contributing to society.
Well, you also contribute to society by throwing a party, I think.
Being a dirty consumer.
No, that's not a dirty consumer, because if you come to a party, everybody has to add something to the atmosphere, to the enjoyment. That's the big mistake many people make. They go to a party and then they say, "Well, if it doesn't, if I don't like it, I'll leave," or things like that. But if you go to a party, you have to contribute yourself. It's the community that makes a party, if you're doing it right, of course. Not if you're just being an individual and not wanting to contribute.
The party has to serve a higher function of some kind, community building or social enforcement. Otherwise, it's
Well,
a waste
that
of time.
is community building. A feast is a community building thing, because people are social beings and they want to come together and everything. So I don't see any reason to say that's parasitical. Not per se.
Yeah, but you're a Catholic.
Well, I'm a pagan Catholic. Don't
Two of them.
don't get me wrong.
It's infested with them.
I count for two, both a pagan and a Catholic.
Same with Yorkshire, I'm sure. We're outnumbered
Yes,
here. There,
well, of the Western tradition, so I am a pagan Catholic.
right. I
And
despise
Yorkshire
Catholicism
Catholic.
because it is way too Middle Eastern and hierarchical, in my opinion, and has nothing to do with
No,
Romantic
just-
character.
Well, hierarchical. It's hierarchical I would say, in a rather good way, because the Pope, for example, is chosen just like the German king or emperor was also chosen by his noblemen. So the structure of the Catholic Church is rather good, I think. It has survived for 2,000 years, don't forget.
Not with this Pope, it won't.
Well, that's something else. Yes.
Right. I guess we're getting this off course again. So,
Yes.
anything you want to add still, anything to Purcell?
Well, it was kind of sad because this was the Ode to Queen Mary, but she died at the end of that year, and if I remember correctly, Purcell also passed away shortly thereafter. So, such a beautiful festive piece, and they both were gone not soon after, or soon after they were both deceased.
Mary
Yeah.
the First, right? Replaced by Anne, I think.
By Anne.
Queen Anne.
Yeah, it must have been Queen Anne.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
no.
Queen Mary. What he played.
Well, shall we move on to your next piece then?
Yes, my next piece is by Johann Christoph Graupner.
Which is another person I had not heard of and was quite. It was difficulter to find than I thought.
Well,
Oh
actually,
yes, Queen Mary. Yes, that's right. Queen Mary, the wife of King William.
Mr.
William.
Yorkshire wakes up.
yeah,
No. Just about not Queen Anne, Queen Mary.
it's Queen Mary.
But she died and
Oh,
was
yes.
replaced by Queen Anne, I think. But never mind.
Yes, yeah. That's right. But it was Queen Mary who died.
Yeah. So Graupner. Let's move back to
Well-
Germany.
It's amazing, but Graupner produced over 2,000 pieces of work, 8 operas, 1,418 sacred cantatas, and
My
24
God.
secular cantatas, 113 symphonies, 86 overture suites, 44 concerti for 1 to 4 instruments, and 66 trio sonatas, as well as keyboard music.
Yeah,
So he was a prolific writer of music.
that's right. He produced for both the church. He produced church music and symphonies. And just to kind of compare with cantatas, as Mr. H has said, Graupner produced over 1,400. Bach produced 200.
Wow.
It's incredible.
And Bach is far more well known than Graupner.
Another interesting thing about Graupner was that he was quite a calligrapher, and all of his writings were they appeared to be they're so beautifully written that one person said they might have been engraved in copper. His impeccable record keeping has been a source of restoring lots of music from the Baroque era, and he recorded to paper many works from Vivaldi and Telemann. So it's because of Graupner that some of these pieces exist, and his impeccable handwriting or calligraphy made it possible to read it in such a perfect form. So there were no doubts when Graupner wrote something. It was very neat, very tidy.
Yes, and do we have the same thing here as with Mozart, that he would simply write it down without any corrections?
It appeared so because most of Graupner's manuscripts were perfectly written. Perhaps it was because he took care of his calligraphy style, or perhaps he didn't make any mistakes. I don't know for sure.
Okay. Well, it can be, of course, especially because if he has written so much music, then it's hardly imaginable that he would be sweating over each piece of it, because, well, life is short, isn't it? Especially at those times. So he must have been a musical genius that simply heard the music and could write it down.
Well,
Yeah,
you know what?
or he wrote 2,000 really shitty pieces.
But here's the frightening thing about everything is that Graupner was extremely. He was not an arrogant person. In fact, when he died, he wanted all of his work to be destroyed by fire, because it was unholy for him to receive accolades for his work. So he requested that everything was burnt by fire. Fortunately, his work was unburned and remained at the castle at Darmstadt after his death. His works were considered property of his employer, so it was not destroyed. Otherwise, we lost everything, including possibly the manuscripts of what he did for reproducing Vivaldi and Telemann in writing.
Oh, yes. So.
It's funny though that we've never really heard of Graupner.
Exactly. But the thing is maybe that Johann Sebastian Bach is so enormous that most composers are hidden in his shadow.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Although Graupner is considered to be the forerunner to Haydn and Mozart.
But still, he wasn't performed that much anymore after his death.
And here's how religious Graupner was. Even as we know the story now with the fire trying to destroy his own work, he did not want a painting of himself made because he thought that was unholy as well. So when I looked up a painting of Graupner to see what he looked like, it's actually a portrait of his employer, Landgrave Ernst Ludwig of Hessen-Darmstadt, because he did not want his own portrait to be made. Very humble man.
Yes. And he was not a Catholic, I guess.
Hesse, probably he was.
It's in Eastern Germany, isn't it? But anyway,
yeah.
so even Catholics can be humble persons, you see?
Exception that proves the rule. So shall we listen to this piece by Graupner? Do you want to enlighten us as to the piece itself, Mr. H?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, the piece is based on Greek mythology. Of course, if the members of the audience, they don't know the story of Dido, the founder of and the queen of Carthage. We could go through a really brief synopsis after we listen to a piece of the opera. We can go through a brief synopsis of the the story. There are a few versions of this, but we'll just go through one of the versions of the story of Dido, the Queen of Carthage.
Yeah. So
we can play the piece.
Sure, we'll play the piece. Graupner's Dido, die koningin van Carthago, agitato da tempeste. I don't know why the first part of the title is in German and the second is in Italian. I'm noticing that this is a pattern with Graupner, so maybe we can explain that afterward. But here we go, Graupner's Dido. See, this I like more.
Yes, so this is more to your taste. You can live with it.
This is more bombastic. I like it.
And I want to dedicate this piece to Queen Anne. That is her pseudonym. Queen Anne is someone that would play, she would do personal concerts for me on her lovely Steinway piano. So I got to hear a lot of piano pieces, definitely Chopin. I heard a lot of Chopin on a beautiful Steinway. And so thank you, Queen Anne. This concert of the singer of this particular version next year will be in the Netherlands, actually.
Ah. We'll have to organize an alt-right takeover of the venue.
Absolutely, it's an honor.
Yes, we'll storm the Concertgebouw and then listen to the music in peace.
Yeah. No beer hall revolt for us. No, we're storming the
Concertgebouw. Yes. And we'll chase all the normies out, and then we'll have a great, wonderful alt-right classical.
We'll host Pepe the Frog flags from the top of the building.
Now, if everyone wanted to hear, I'm sure everyone here knows the story of Dido, the Queen of Carthage. If I can give just a brief synopsis, and anyone can step in anytime they want. This piece, of course, this opera is based on her story. Dido, well, as you know, Carthage was a kingdom on the coast of North Africa, but it was actually Phoenician. It was a colony of the Phoenicians. Now, Dido had a brother. The king wanted the son and the daughter to share royal power after his death. apparently that wasn't such a good idea to someone, and Dido's husband was murdered. Pygmalion seized the throne and murdered Dido's husband. Dido and her followers fled from the area and landed on the shores of North Africa. There was a local ruler, North African, named Larbus. And Larbus agreed to sell Dido as much land as a hide of the bull could cover. So Dido, being the clever lady that she is, she cut the bull's hide into thin strips and used it to outline a large area of land. And that land that was outlined was Carthage, and she became the queen. Now Carthage became a prosperous city, and Larbus pursued Dido and wanted to marry her to get this piece of his land back. Now Dido refused because her husband was dead, and she was faithful to her dead husband, and she swore to never marry again. Now Larbus, he wouldn't take no for an answer, and even threatened Carthage with war unless Dido agreed to marry. Now Dido, she saw no other alternative but to throw herself into the flames of a funeral pyre. Now another version of the story is that she mounted the pyre, but instead of throwing herself in the fire, she stabbed herself. And you'll see a statue, it looks like a Bellini statue. I don't know if it's made by him, but a statue of Dido thrusting a dagger into her own stomach. And that is the story.
But there was something else, wasn't there? Something about Dido and Aeneas, about the fateful decision that Dido and Aeneas were lovers.
Oh,
and then,
so this is probably another Roman thing. Aeneas is always the Romans' go-to character to justify Roman actions, glories, whatever. I mean,
well, yes, but that's okay. I mean, we're just talking about the history and about the stories that came out of it.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because the Roman poet Virgil used this story.
He used Aeneas to justify the connection to Troy and ancient Greece.
Well, Virgil's account was a little different, and like you said, the Trojan leader Aeneas was shipwrecked on the shore near Carthage, and when Dido was building the new city, I guess Dido was, or Aeneas was captured by the king and was made to work for the king. I have to remember the entire story, but in Virgil's version was a little different. That is certainly true.
Yeah.
And then, well, at least, well, I know from Purcell that his opera about Dido and Aeneas, which is also very very good, is that Aeneas is driven away. He says adieu to his lover, and she commits suicide, and he goes on to be the how do you say to found Rome.
Yeah.
So that's how.
What I'm saying. Virgil used Aeneas as Roman propaganda to justify, basically to give Roman identity, and
well, nothing wrong with this. This is a nice piece of good propaganda, is there?
Aeneas, he did begin to act as though he were king of Carthage. And that Jupiter sent a message to tell Aeneas that he could not remain in Carthage. Rather, his destiny was to found a new city for the Trojans in Italy.
Yes.
So
yeah, I'm sure.
Well, you don't have to believe it. Just
Look, you can never
enjoy the
trust.
story.
The point that I'm trying to make is that you can never trust an Italian.
Well, don't forget, Italians at those times were quite different people than the people there now.
True.
I mean, the classical Romans were much more like Germans than the present day Italians.
True, yeah.
So, but anyway, I enjoyed the story. So, yeah. But if I'm correct, then different from the story that you are that's in the other opera. Is that correct?
well, you mean the Purcell opera? Because
Yes,
Purcell
so
dealt with this theme
Graupner
as
is,
well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Graupner is very different. The story is very different.
So was the Purcell version more in line with Virgil?
Yes, but I think it was more of a question. How does the Graupner version go?
How does it end?
Is Aeneas even in it?
I guess not.
I don't see anything here that says that the Graupner version has Aeneas.
No.
I'm not saying that it
So it's
doesn't.
quite a different story.
You see, Germans telling the truth.
Of course, of course.
Because the piece that I chose was definitely centered around Dido herself, and
Mhm.
I will have to do some research on that. That's an interesting point because I do want to go to the concert next year, and the concert that will be in Rotterdam is about African queens, so it's about Dido.
No.
No,
It's gonna
African
be- it's gonna
Queens.
be black
it's Purcell,
people, isn't
isn't it? No, it's
Oh
not.
my god, it is. It's going to be one of those progressive shit pieces where they made it all modern and they put a bunch
Actually-
of Africans in it.
Actually, I dug into it. It is antiquity, so I don't believe they've incorporated any
That's-
sub-Saharans. It is definitely antiquity.
No, look, they'll
Yes.
be doing a "We Was Kangs" thing. They'll be saying, "No, look, it's Africa. Of course, it's blacks."
Yes. The thing is, the blacks are always talking about this cultural appropriation thing, but if you look, for example, in Shakespeare, they've got black actors now. Even the mistress of one of the English kings, who was a quite very white woman, she's played by a black person now. So, I mean, that's really our culture and our history is being taken away from us.
It's just Othello, and he gets knifed.
No. It was in a new series about one of the English kings. I don't know exactly. So it's not at all unlikely that they will put blacks in the roles of Julius Caesar, for example, or Aeneas, or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, we've had a black Lancelot recently, haven't we?
Yes.
And
That's-
to be honest, I always expected that part being appropriated by a black, because it gives I think it's the BBC who did this casting, gives the BBC the chance to have a white king cuckolded by a black man.
Of course.
Yes, indeed. And also, Lancelot is the wisest and most noble of knights.
Well,
So
no.
of course, you will have a black man doing
Well,
that.
It's like they always say he's the noblest of all the knights, but when you read him like Chaucer or anything, he's just a prick. He just goes around fucking other people's wives and beating people up, and
Yeah, he was a psychopath.
I mean, Galahad is the actual most upstanding moral knight in the Arthur cycle.
That's right. That's why he
But
finds.
you have different versions, haven't you?
I've read the Chaucer one, and I've read the really weird communist propaganda one by White.
Oh, T.H.Y., the Once and
Yes.
Future King. Yeah.
I really got the idea, the whole piece about the ants and the geese and everything. I really got an idea that he was talking about communism versus other ideologies, and he was promoting communism in some way.
Wait a minute. I also read The Once and Future King a long time ago. You say it's a piece of communist propaganda?
It does.
It is. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, I don't remember that.
The joke of it is that like with all these people who write communist propaganda, he was born on the idyllic island of Anglesey, which is absolutely beautiful and very traditional and everything, and sort of rebelled against his own comfort, if you like.
What it
Mhm.
it really it starts by idolizing the community peasants and serfs and everything, and having like the adopted father of Arthur. What's his name again?
Uther Pendragon?
Yes. No, not Pendragon. Pendragon is his biological father. He has this other, the adopted father. But that guy really works with the serfs, and he doesn't have any class consciousness, and he works together with them. And then it goes on about the piece where he goes with Merlin, and he becomes an ant and a goose, and It goes through all the different philosophies, anarchism, communism, and so on. And basically, it presents anarcho-communism of the Geese as sort of the ideal of society. And there is some anti-Stalin stuff in there as well in the piece about the ants, but it is definitely a communist piece.
Oh, well, you've ruined a nice experience now. Well, it was a long time ago, of course, but
Yeah,
I've been had. It's horrible.
yeah.
But going back to Lancelot, Faust is absolutely right. You know, he behaves like a psychopath at times, and this is satirized in Monty Python's Holy Grail.
The most
Where
perfect
John
casting.
Cleese's Lancelot goes in and kind of kills everyone at a wedding in this castle.
I think it was the best casting to put John Cleese in that. He plays him fantastically.
Yes, he plays it like a sort of a psychopathic English policeman, which is rather amusing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's well. I learned a lot today. Very nice, very nice.
Yes. Right. So let's just get back to Galton. I think this series has had a bit of a habit of going, oh yeah, this was quite interesting. Now let me tell you about religion, or let me tell you about political philosophy. Then it's like, oh yeah, shit, we were supposed to be discussing music.
It seems we don't really love music that much, do we?
Music is a backdrop to life. Let's use that as an excuse.
Ooh, I don't.
Well, Mr. H and I, we're going to, make a little film on the Opera House that you can tag on the back of this if you want.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
I'm guessing that after this recording, you'll be making the streets of Vienna unsafe, heading to some beer holes.
Yes.
Yes, we will be destroying all the pagans here.
Well,
So by the end of the night, you'll both be drunk and in a fist fight. Catholicism, no, paganism.
so how's the weather in Vienna? We're just not talking about music now. Well, how's the weather in Vienna?
It's warm. It's about 20 degrees.
Oh, wonderful.
And a bit of cloud. Can't see any chemtrails, so Alex Jones will be disappointed about that.
I'm quite sure. Did you visit Schönbrunn or the old city already, or are you planning to?
No, we basically went to the cathedral,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
To the
The Stephansdom.
Hofburg Cathedral, and then the Hofburg area we were at. And
the Hofburg Chapel. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. It's
Capelle,
a great city. It's a great city. It's a bit like Paris, but then with a warmer touch, you might say, a little bit Italian over there.
Well, I'm actually surprised that the demographics here today was quite pleasant, actually.
Yeah, it's not been any kind. I mean, the ethnics we've seen have been largely East Asian.
Really?
Yeah. Shocked. I mean, it's absolutely pleasant.
Yes, I can imagine. I thought there would be many other ethnicities running around.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not, and very surprisingly so.
There'll be Slovenes and Hungarians there, probably.
Oh, yeah.
They belong more or less over there. Don't forget. Yes. The double monarchy, etc., etc., etc.
Oostenrijk gehört Deutschland zu.
Yeah, it was always a little bit different. That's okay.
Yeah, like the Schweizerdeutsch. And us, I suppose. Us too.
But when I was in Vienna, I was struck by the difference between the Baroque area of Vienna, the older part of Maria Theresia and things like that, and the Vienna of Franz Joseph, the last or almost the last emperor. I thought the Schönbrunn, for example, and the old city is much more natural somehow. It's much more pleasant than the 19th century Vienna, the Ring, and so it's beautiful, but it is also rather strained or something.
That's right. The late 19th century architecture, early 20th, that's sort of an austerity to it here, I think.
Yes.
What's wrong with austerity?
No, it's
the Calvinists.
austerity. It's austerity born from strain, you might say. If you look at, that's my personal experience. If you go to the older Vienna, then there's much more Gemütlichkeit. There's a confidence in the building still that is simply we are who we are and we can enjoy ourselves. Whereas the 19th century ring is much more, we have to hold on power. We somehow have to keep this big empire together. There's more stress, more strain, it seems. And of course, there was a lot of strain on the Austrian Empire at that time.
I do know that modernism as an architectural style started in Austria and in Vienna particularly, and well, that's quite an ugly style, of course, and it's kind of starts the whole decline of Western architecture. So I suppose that's their point.
Yeah, but that's a little bit later. Huh? The
No,
19th century.
No, you're talking 1910 or so when modernism starts, the first modernist buildings.
Okay, but the ring was built around 1870 or something. So, but that's I think that it has to do with the fact that when Austria, the old Austria of Maria Theresia, you had this empire, all right, but the people were still more or less not traveling. They were in their own lands, you might say. But in the 19th century, people started moving, and it was becoming a real multicultural heaven, you might say. And if different ethnicities come to live next to each other, you get a lot of tension. So
one of the reasons for this, of course, was that in the early 19th century, Vienna became the capital of the Habsburg Empire and became a center to gravitate towards for all the different peoples of the Habsburg Empire.
Yes, and don't forget the railroads were implemented, were built, so travel was much easier. So people came much more in contact with each other, and you got these big cities where that became the horrible melting pot that we know, for example, in New York or something.
See, this is why I have anarcho-primitivist sympathies.
Yeah,
yes.
That's true. Actually, I mean, in France, there's a town there called Auxerre, and they, at the end of the 19th century, and they resisted a direct railroad coming from Paris because they didn't want the riffraff getting there.
Yes, and they're quite right. It's also the reason, for example, why the metro in New York has all kinds of lines that don't go anywhere because people don't want those people to come over to New York, so that to keep them out, you might say.
Well, my point was more that with the more ease of transportation, you get people moving and more mixing, and you lose bloodlines. But yeah.
That's also true, but it's also that if real different ethnicities get close to each other, it's conflict.
True.
So it's two things.
Right. Well, I think if there's anything to add you want to say about Graupner, Mr. H, I think we have to wrap this up because I have to get going.
Okay.
I think we've covered the composers. I hope the listeners enjoyed my musical choice. And yeah, if you can, come to Vienna, enjoy the culture. We're having a good time here. It's beautiful. It's a lot to see. And a lot of musical history here, of course.
Yeah, and if you're up for some theater storming, then join us in Rotterdam whenever that piece is played.
Absolutely. I'll send you guys a link. You have a whole year to plan. It'll be...
Yes.
So you were talking about this gun plot earlier, you say?
Yeah, that's right. It was headed by a guy called Catesby, but Guy Fawkes was the one they captured.
Very interesting. I'm thinking, maybe we could do something similar.
Don't be silly.
Yeah, where are you going to get barrels of gunpowder these days, anyway?
Yes, exactly.
Well,
yes, Guy Fawkes was the chap they caught, but he was led by Catesby.
All right. It was more of a joke, but I guess that Right. Well, I'll thank you all for joining me, and the next episode, of course, will be Wagner's choices, which I'm sure that the much-awaited discussion about Wagner will occur in that one.
Of course.
There has
Of
been
course.
there has been public demand for it, so we'll
Yes.
and that will conclude our picks, and then we'll have to see if we do anything more with this series. I might have some Hungarians who want to talk about Hungarian music and so on, but we shall
Okay.
see. We shall see how this carries
Yes.
on, and maybe we'll do other forms of art as well in the future. But let's leave that to the concluding episode. Thank you for joining me, Wagner.
Yes, glad to be here.
Thank you for joining me, Mr. Yorkshire.
You're very welcome.
And thank you for joining me, Mr. H.
Yep, perfect timing because I believe the staff here at this lovely cafe is about ready to kick us out. So
No, he's just leaving his shift.
Oh, he's just leaving his shift. Okay.
Well,
Well-
I guess we'll leave the two of you to make Vienna unsafe. Alright, very good. Dank u allemaal voor het luisteren en een fijne avond. Of, nou in dit geval middag, uitzonderlijk genoeg.